Go to, you face him. Go with, you stand next to him.
Ah, okay. Okay, so now let's go with.
There's actually what I can do,
Okay.
and I'm gonna do it. Sorry about that, Bruce. Sorry about that, Quam.
That's fine.
I
Mm,
just made sure we're all in the same place.
okay. Well, why don't you make? Why don't you be either you or
Josh.
Josh just lead us?
Okay. Um,
Are you happy to do that, Leo, or would you like me to?
well, I'm happy to do it. Well, but it would be important to, well, if Bruce could let us know where would he like to start.
Thank you, Leo. My work is as of view 13,
Should
but
we
I'm
go
also
there?
quite happy if we
Yep.
start with yeah.
So, should we go to view 13 or you wanna start elsewhere?
I'm quite happy for us to start on view 13. Or great.
Cool. Remember, you can point at things so we can see what you're referring to. That,
Okay,
that helps.
excellent. Okay, well, are we waiting on anyone else? If not, I can. I'd be quite happy to introduce myself, and hopefully we
Well,
can take it from.
Bruce,
Yes,
you invited some people. Are they likely to becoming, they'll drop in as and when?
I think they'll drop in as and when. More than anything else, they haven't actually played around with the cube, so they may drop in
Ah,
as
okay,
a guest rather than interactive with the session. So they'd
sure.
be able to hopefully get to hear everything else that's going on.
And I will
All right
keep an
then.
eye out as well, Bruce, for any new people. And if it looks like they need any help, I will make contact with them and make sure they're okay.
Many thanks.
Okay,
Okay,
so
so at the moment it just seems it's just us, Leo, Kwame, Josh. Okay. Um, well, Leo, we haven't met. So I don't know if you've read anything online on the Cube about myself. But the long and short of it is, as you may well have come to learn through my work, I'm an abstract artist um, originating from Zimbabwe. I now live in London, and of course, for quite some time since early 2000, late 2007 or early 2008, Kwame and I started working together where I was showing my work through the exhibitions that he was holding. I believe the first one was in Willesden Green. Ever since then, we've had either one or two shows going. Most of my work is abstract. I purely work on that simply because the way I paint is driven by emotion. Unlike most artists that would work from a start point with a plan and then they methodically walk through how they're going to execute a piece, I sort of deconstruct all those, I suppose, all those that regimented approach to painting, and I simply work at it from an emotional perspective. And I think for me, it's simply a process where I feel it lends a piece, um, uh, a connection with a feeling or emotion, and with the hope that it translates to a viewer. And of course, with the help of a title, it sort of then may help bridge some areas where maybe there's a much more needed explanation of a piece. For example, self-reflection, which, as we walk through the gallery, I shall point it out, and maybe with that one I can take some questions and as well as many others as well.
Okay. How about
Now,
this?
yeah.
I'm trying
Sorry, go
to
on.
identify well, it's related to the title. This one is untitled.
That's right. Some of the pieces I have done, I have left them untitled. All the titles have been pretty much arrived at simply because they felt right. But some pieces, it's sort of a little challenging because it just seems there's no one salient title that would work with it. For example, the piece we're looking at, I've had a situation where I look at the piece on one hand. I see a cross. On the other, I see quite a number of tumultuous images from that one painting. So with this painting here, I see a lot more to it than just the one salient theme, and therefore it makes it, for me at least, a little challenging to title a piece, because I feel sometimes titles can lend a piece
Yeah,
with only one perspective.
I see.
Hmm.
And the more you spend watching it, the more you realize what you're talking about, isn't it? You can see
Yeah,
it.
there's quite a lot.
Bruce,
Yeah.
I wonder whether there is any merit in going to some of your earlier works and explaining the difference between what you did then and what you've done now. Of course, unless of course there's no difference.
I
Is that
think with
helpful?
my earlier pieces, there's only one piece on the cube that I can reference to, which goes back to 2008, which is the uh, bear with me one moment. I have to look for that.
The puzzle?
It is, yeah. Let's see. Oh, I think I know where that is. Now, but having said that, I don't think it would give much of it would lend much of a difference in terms of its style of the way I've painted it. Simply because it's very much abstract more than anything else. Just like the works that I've created now. It's a shame that you can't see the stuff that we have in storage. Um, and this is the piece here, puzzle. This goes back in 2008, and as you can tell, it doesn't really have too much of difference in terms of style with what I've done. But there are earlier pieces of works that I've created, and just to build a picture in your mind. Um, One of them, I title it Mother Africa, which is quite very much obvious when you look at the piece, because it's a woman, a pregnant woman, and on her belly I painted the map of Africa in white. And I suppose what I'm alluding at there is Africa is our mother, and we need to look after her, and you can derive quite a lot from that. Uh, I think also it's fair to say, from my perspective, there was an element of a political uh, drive with that piece, and that was created around about 2006 and 7. And I think my view as someone living in the diaspora and looking on Africa and looking at quite a lot that's happening from a political perspective, it just felt quite a lot of what I remember, more so of Zimbabwe, seemed to have eroded, and quite a lot of the contributory factors or the driving factors towards that had quite a lot of political implications and that sort of approach. And that was a piece for me that pretty much resonated that, which was more figurative, which would also be quite fair to point out, as opposed to the work that I've created now.
And that's just about the time when you moved to the UK, isn't it?
Not at all. I moved to the United Kingdom in August of 1998.
Oh, okay.
So between then and 2006, I wasn't showing much of my work. If beg your pardon, I wasn't showing any of my work at all. It's only pretty much the middle of 2000 I then took a proactive stance to show my work. But having said that, I had quite a lot of paintings that I had created over, I suppose, probably going back 1999 when I picked up painting again, living in the United Kingdom. But prior to that, I did paint some pieces living whilst I was living in Africa. But all of them were abstract rather than figurative.
Is there a title for this painting in front of us?
That's right. It's titled Puzzle. There's a very interesting story with this painting. In 2008, we had a show we were about to show in Mayfair. Kwame and I had did a recce run. We went up to the gallery to have a look at the space and pretty much get a feel for it. And whilst we were there, there was an exhibition going on, paintings from Aborigine people. But these weren't any sort of paintings. These were the very raw paintings from Aborigine artists who haven't gone through the doors of any academic institution to paint. They were painting from emotion. They were painting from raw talent. And this one particular Aborigine artist, she was sitting in the corner on the floor of the gallery in the main reception area, and she was literally painting as at the same time crashing some little pebble stones in order to arrive at a powder form of paint. And she mixed up her paint as she was going along and making up colors that she felt she needed for each piece. So, nonetheless, she was painting a piece of work which was abstract in its concept, with circles. Most of it was circular rather than squares, as I have it here. But what struck me the most was it was the argument between an Aborigine artist that hardly speaks English, and probably, and it is also a very key point to point out. She was barefooted, which says a lot about what she holds wholesome and not. And there she is in the middle of Mayfair, barefooted, and so it represented this juxtaposed world where you think of Mayfair. It's a centerpiece of fashion, where you have that whole Oxford Circus. It's a centerpiece of fashion in London, or one of many. And of course, you have this artist creating in Mayfair, and so puzzle seemed a very obvious route to take with a painting that was inspired by her, because it was quite, almost to begin with, my knee-jerk reaction puzzling as to the fact that she's made it into Mayfair, and it probably took, I don't know, her first passport ever to travel, or maybe not. But the whole concept of an Aborigine artist in the center of Mayfair, to begin with, was puzzling, but yet still quite humbling as well. So puzzle seemed quite obvious for this sort of piece.
can see.
Have we lost someone?
No,
But actually, in a way, I would say that puzzle is actually quite different to any of the other paintings on in the exhibition because it's got form, it's got boxes, it's got
exactly.
kinds of things which yeah, sit there, which the other ones are free flowing. Am
Yeah.
I right?
No, well, you are right. In terms of style,
Yeah.
it may, if we delve into it from that approach, yeah. The others have or tend to, but in the exception of Noir Gold, of course, they all tend to have free flow. Um, I guess once again, in terms of inspiration, you would find with the most Aboriginal paintings, you have either circles or whatever shape one chooses, albeit blotting on canvas. It would sort of have a pattern to it. Um, and I guess in this case, I suppose with the inspiration derived from an Aborigine artist creating her work, I sort of sought to that, but equally as well wanting to actually keep to my own style. So, ergo, the breakup of the squares as you sort of feed into the middle of the piece, as opposed to the top and bottom.
And why did you choose those colors,
Thank you for that.
Bruce?
That's a good question. I guess when I think of Australia, the 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 way it's always sold, you've got the red rock, very earthy, and then of course yellow is sun, and I guess the black would, for me, represented an Aborigine person, as it's seldom referred to as blacks in Australia. So it kind of made a lot of sense to keep it simple and not make it terribly too contrived or complex for the sake of it.
Really, really
Can I
cool.
ask about the brown? Sorry, can I ask about the next one to puzzle, Bruce?
Sure. Okay.
And
Stay with me one moment. Okay.
what's really
Yeah.
interesting as well here, since you mentioned Bruce, when you drag your cursor over the places where it says view 13, 14, 15, 16, there's, you can see underneath it, below it, there's the picture that you actually see when you go to those places. So we
Ah,
were in
yes.
view
That's quite
16,
useful.
so okay,
Yeah.
just helps
That
in the
well. Thank you
shortcut.
so much. Yeah. Yeah. I think it will certainly help when I walk people through this as well. Excellent. Thank you.
Cool.
Ah, Kwame.
Kwame hasn't paid his electricity bill.
Hi,
And
Eddie.
and
Or his
that's another
electron bill.
untitled, Bruce.
Yeah, you're quite right. This piece, Leo. Interesting story behind it. Its creative form, once again, not driven by anything or the other or any other matter, but simply the desire to paint. And I felt I needed something to say. What specifically was sort of a misnomer. I went to the Tate and I paid a visit to the part with uh, Pollock, Jackson Pollock's work, and Kressner, his better half then, and or his better half, shall I say? Shall I put it that way? And in this case, you can see the Pollock inspiration, and and I think there was the painting I'm referring to with Lee Kressner was I think it's called Knife or Woman with Knife Slicing, and she had these very much pronounced forms about her. And but what's interesting is whenever we talk about this painting with Kwame, and this is why I laughed as well, in case you're wondering, Kwame always refers to it very much so as the uh, posterior of a woman.
Oh. Well, we can tell
I
why.
can't see that.
Well, right. Right. So yeah, but there was no intention of, I suppose, explicit intention to do so. Perhaps maybe subliminally, there was some intention to paint, I guess, after my visit to the Tate, a female, but nonetheless, when I was painting it wasn't quite so. I was interested in form. I was interested in different dialogue by different forms of structures that place themselves on canvas or any background. Um, so that really was the undertaking with this piece. It was purely a hankering to paint, but never one to depict a female body with a view from looking at her from while she's facing the other way. So that wasn't the impetus to it. Nonetheless, Kwame seems to see that. So I don't know. One can make their own conclusion on that one.
Yeah.
Very nice. I like the way the colors meld into each other.
They it seemed to work for me as well. And um, a little background with that. I used Japanese rice paper, and I don't know if it terribly shows much on an image, but the charcoal gray areas that would they seem to almost suggest. That's right. Thank you. They seem to suggest almost kind of like a gray paint, but far from it. It's actually Japanese rice paper, and the reason why I used it is it allowed to have these natural forms of grayness on a black background without having to heavily rely on one material, which is paint. And then that way it gives it a little bit more. And I suppose when you look at the painting in person, um, there are little silver specks within that area, some of which are dotted generously around there, and pretty much all over that gray area. But when you look at the painting in person, it starts to give you more. And as the light is absorbed within the painting, it starts to re-engage with you at every point. And then, of course, you have these areas as well with the orange, the red, the green blots, if you will. Those areas to touch are very much alive. The texture is there. They're so raised you cannot ignore them. And as you look at them, they're almost inviting to actually touch them as well. So from that perspective, the materials that I used on this are quite exciting when you look at the painting more than a photograph. I don't know also as well if you can actually have a look in this area over here. Um, the the canvas looks somewhat a little ruffled, which would demonstrate the use of another material, in this case the Japanese rice paper. Would you like me to take you
Very nice.
to?
Yep.
Thank you so much. I think this is going to be a very interesting section for me. We'll start. We'll start with pink. Well, for the purposes of the cube, its title is Pink Banner, but it ought to be Pink Strip. Um, with this one, I was seeking to to say something without necessarily having to be specific on one area or the other in terms of my subject matter. This is actually created in back in 2013 when Rafe, my son, was due to be born, and for some reason I wanted a girl more than a boy, um, and my wife Nadia, well, she was quite happy to have a boy, and I think Pink Strip was sort of my internalization or expression of what I internalized um, round about that time. So it just seemed quite fitting um, to create that piece.
Was it before Reef was born or after?
Before we went with, well, my wife went with the route of, well, let's not find out the sex just yet. I think this was after the first. I painted this after the first scan, and we had the second scan to go to, which we had concluded that maybe if we still feel quite anxious about what sex the baby is, maybe we'll find out then. So it was before we actually understood, had any understanding what sex a baby was. Now, shall I bring you to this piece here to the left? Uh, Everything is connected. Now that piece is on it's acrylic, as most of my work, on canvas. Um, I don't quote me on this, but I think from the top of my head, I painted this in either 2009 or 10. So it's quite a piece of it's a piece I've had for quite some time. Um, it, and I've always been quite resistant in selling it. Um, and I guess everything is connected for me. I guess talks about a vast number of topics one may think of, relationships in terms of either work or personal or international relationships. That I suppose one can also derive uh, the, the the cycle of consequences or of actions that in some way or the other everything sort of comes full circle. So for me, everything is connected. It's pretty much talking about quite a lot of issues happening around myself, albeit personal or some that I experienced or observed happening around me. That was that period of time was a very interesting time for me because it was a transitional period where I was making the transition from working in a corporate environment, moving on to doing what I loved the most, which is creating and most importantly, showing my work, so as I can have the opportunity to talk about it. and of course some people may have the opportunity, should they choose to purchase it and have it in their own space. So that whole transitional period meant walking away from what I'm used to or what I'd become accustomed to. And then moving on to a world where, albeit that I'm chasing something that I'm quite passionate about, but it also meant learning new skills, I suppose life skills, and also changing the way I live, because it also meant I had to start thinking about money in a very different way. Now that I don't have a 9 to 5, I have to be more uh, careful with how I spend my money. So with that as well, you've got all these challenges with life, and trials and tribulations, the highs and lows. And I suppose everything is connected for me. It's a very passionate and emotional piece, uh, which talks about the highs and lows as well, as I go along.
That's great. I see a lot of birds in there, Bruce.
Oh,
Strangely
that's
enough.
interesting.
Yeah.
My father-in-law saw that piece for the first time a couple of years ago, and he then alluded at that, and he started from this area talking about birds. So it's very interesting that you. Kwame?
Sorry, we were muted.
Ah,
So you were saying that your father-in-law he mentioned the birds and then I lost you. Sorry.
yes. So well, the end of that was it's quite interesting that you should mention that, you know, the same point of view that he had, where he talked about seeing quite a lot of birds. But once again, there's quite a lot of influence as well with Jackson Pollock's approach to painting, which once again is something that you tend to see quite a lot in my earlier pieces um, that I've created.
Yeah, see that. Cool. Is who else is here? So just a quick spin. Um,
Sure.
Josh, where are you?
I'm with you. I'm with all the rest. Oh no, wait, I'm not. Sorry, I thought we'd already moved on to the next pages. I'd skipped ahead to the wrong bit. Um, yeah, no, I found this really fascinating. This one, I really like the contrast between sort of the more, I guess, the more vibrant colours, the yellow, the red, and the
Yeah.
white in the foreground, and the more muted greys and blacks and blues in the background. Almost as if the blue and the black was an existing painting, and you've painted over the top of that, which I find really effective, really quite powerful.
Thank you. There's a piece that I actually did, and it found a new home for the Mayfair exhibition, during the Mayfair exhibition, which is around about 2008. Um, the style that was actually titled String Quartet. It was a very abstract piece that celebrated, as the title suggests, music, and a collective group of people playing music, and it had a very much blue, solid background with a yellow, white, and black foreground, which were the colors that I used to be to hone in specifically on the quartet. And sometimes when I look at this piece, areas as such, and as such as well, they I almost start to see um, some sort of musician playing violin or the other. And I don't know if it's quite obvious to anyone else, but for me, certainly so. So it's almost a piece that keeps giving, more than it keeps evolving every time I look at it. More so, for myself, which I always find interesting when a painting that I've created does that, for me at least.
Yeah, I definitely think one of the most fascinating aspects about your paintings is how much you leave open to the interpretation of the viewer, and for them to bring their own ideas and their own interpretation of that to the painting. That's really interesting.
Here.
Yeah.
One of my views is art should not be one's knee-jerk reaction to viewing art shouldn't be, at least, about understanding the piece, but should be about the experience, and seeking the experience and the soul of a piece. And I think that way, with my abstract pieces, um, it's a start of a journey for one to enjoy it, or criticize it, whatever it be that they want to, where they want to begin with that piece. But it's certainly that the experience and the soul of the piece. I think for me that would definitely be my gambit, with these pieces.
We're standing on your shoulders, Bruce. So
Here,
you're taking us.
I'm trying to, if you bear with me, I should be able to achieve it successfully. I'm trying to navigate myself just nicely above. There we are. Self-reflection. Um, I don't know if if you've noticed this, whilst looking at it. This piece was created on the back of a mirror that we acquired from IKEA. It's about 120 centimeters in height, and 80 to 90 centimeters, no, beg your pardon, 70 centimeters in width. Um, the the inspiration behind this piece, and I suppose this is quite important. There's a piece of artwork that Kwame, big early part of this year or middle part of this year, saw and photographed in New York, when he and Audrey went away on holiday, and I think the artist is Basqui, um, and he had done something which is almost kind of graffiti-esque, on a canvas of choice. And he talked about a social issue at the time that seemed or was quite important to him. And I believe, if I'm not wrong, it was about slavery. And he talked about different points, but he presented them with parts of the piece figurative and parts of the piece in writing. Now, quite a lot of issues that bring about quite a lot of so issues that I find quite integral to me are social issues, issues that um, affect us, albeit directly or indirectly. That and also some probably not so much, but on an international platform. And I've always been quite keen to paint something, and so looking at this photograph painting sort of gave the impetus to this painting. Um, because all along I've wanted to do something on a social scale, but one project prior to this was about the diversity of London, and it's still a work in progress. But using languages to identify different people from different countries. So in this case, this piece, I wanted to talk about something that was present, relevant, and a big issue which would stem from the whole issue on migration and the Mediterranean and people drowning. But I was also quite exacerbated with turning on the news, and there's well, what felt to me as a spin of one person's view, and it seemed to me whomever can articulate themselves more clearly, or whomever seemed to have a more plausible argument, then people would sort of lean towards that direction in terms of adopting that point of view. And then, of course, you've got issues here, welfare, uh, talk about social support. So there was a time, and I'm not sure if you can recall, where you turn on the television and you'd have all these reality TV stars talking about or debating about uh, the benefit system and how people ought to be treated or not treated. So it felt we all rushed to conclusions, perhaps maybe without sufficient information. So this piece, self-reflection, is painted behind a mirror with all these subject matters written on the canvas. I talk about the right wing, the left wing, and sadly, along this column here, what you don't see at the moment, for one reason or the other, is I had some inscription. For example, on the right-hand side here, I had Iraq, Blair, and Bush. All those three words had a common letter, which I used to join all of them up. So in putting all these points here, the deficit and this letter, this envelope from the House of Parliament is to get people to think about these issues, uh, immigrants, citizens, to think about these issues, but also then ask themselves the one salient question. Um, am I responding to them, or is my opinion well researched, or do I know enough about this issue to have an opinion and put it out there in the public domain? So self-reflection is about people self-reflecting on these issues and asking themselves rather than anybody else. If I'm going to talk about equality, if I'm going to talk about the deficit, human rights, jobs, the 1%, am I coming at it from a perspective of having sufficient information, or is it because I read yesterday's tagline, or am I just frustrated with the 1% because I'm not part of it? So it's just a piece for people to sort of ask themselves those key questions, I suppose.
Yeah, there's several ones
Can I
there.
just?
Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Kwame.
I managed to get myself back in. Um, I wonder if it's worth saying that for me, although the whole idea is to get people to buy the artworks in this exhibition, as a black person and as a black Londoner, this piece of work is one of the most significant ones, actually, because it speaks to all kinds of issues which are in the air at the moment, and I just love seeing it.
Thank
So
you.
thank you for that.
It wasn't it wasn't the impetus to creating it, but as I say, with all my abstract pieces, one of my key aims is for people to have their own experience, and so it's quite rewarding to hear that for you it has that very important perspective and something that you feel is quite paramount. So I feel having I have achieved the ability for people to actually take from it what is paramount and what they feel very strong about. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Josh, did you have?
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to ask, just because I can't make it out quite so clearly on Cube,
Sure.
what is represented on this white part that looks like a piece of paper in the middle of the painting.
Oh, over here?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Ah, that's the knots and crosses hashtag type of a table. And I put that there. It's more, you can get to appreciate it more on a when you see the piece on a one-to-one basis. But it was the whole voting structure. Do you vote Tory? Do you vote Labour? And that whole argument was there. The knots and crosses, the more so the crosses are the symbolic to one casting their vote, as it were, during the elections. And these were the elections that we've just had. This piece was painted in 2015. And I'm sure the date on that wasn't necessarily the date on when it was painted, but it was the date on the year of all these issues that I had I talked about. And I don't know, Josh, if you can actually see this part right here, where I have 330 over 232. At one point, that
Yes.
was the count of votes for the Tories and Labour, and of course, right here I have in some marking indicated the right wing, and I've got the left wing. Sorry, over here, the left wing, and interestingly, with this envelope, inside is a letter that I had written to all viewers of this painting. And it's also a very interactive piece, if you will, but in a much more old-fashioned way as opposed to the cube. You literally have to physically put your hand inside the envelope and pull out the letter, and the letter reads to all voters: may your vote or may you cast your vote wisely, and full stop. So once again, it's almost trying to remain neutral and not give my opinion on what I think is the right. Because I can't. I certainly would be a little over the top of me to assume I can speak for everyone. So I just also felt that was quite necessary, and I suppose once again it sort of goes back to, are we casting our vote, albeit for Labour or for SNP or for the Tories, with the right information? And are we doing so responsibly? Because I think in all these issues that I've mentioned here, 4,200 migrants rescued, as I talk about over there, the English Rose, human rights. We talk about all these EU referendum. We talk about all these things, and people seem to, when you watch Question Time or Newsnight, everyone seems to have fixed ideas and visceral about the point that they have to make. And they're so convincing that there is no other way to look at these issues. Well, I feel that maybe the question needs to be asked: do we have the right information, and are we making informed decision to whatever level and degree that is? But do we have that? And I suppose from a social perspective, it's our responsibility to make sure whatever decision we make, Labour or Tory, it's for the benefit of all, not just for a select group.
Well, thank you very much for clarifying that, because I think that really adds another level to the painting understanding. Well, especially about the letter that's there.
Here. Now I'm going to see if hang on, if we have other paintings. Yes, we do. And just right behind us, we have emotions. Um, Yeah, I think once again with as I've been echoing with all my paintings, they're all pretty much painted from emotion rather than any other agenda. Um, the other thing I suppose that's also quite interesting with my creative processes, unlike most artists, all my paintings are done in one sitting. Um, and the reason for that, I feel, is I can never revisit an emotion to express what I have to say. So this piece was driven by two things. I had so much that I wanted to express about my emotions, and quite a lot of my works, I think they sort of expose me a little bit than probably I'm comfortable with after creating them, because then it says a lot about what I felt or how I was feeling at one point or the other. And with this case, it talks about the high points and low points emotionally for me, albeit driven by internal or external issues. And that piece is this piece right here is quite indicative of that. So when you look at the darker areas, it's not so much the fact that every dark area has to be representative of a dark place or something awful, but some of them they felt necessary to have a dark piece of paint, for example, in this area or that area, because then it makes the whole statement for the whole piece make a lot of sense. For example, in the way the colors sort of meet up and form a whole piece. But it's a flow of different emotions that I sort of felt a whole surge of in all in one sitting. So all my paintings are done in one sitting simply because then I can capture and talk about that emotion without having to contrive it. Because I feel if I have to walk away from it and then come back again, then it's almost contrived because I have to sort of force myself to go back to that place rather than continue painting whilst I'm there. That way it lends itself with some honesty, I feel. Um, and of course, then you have the circle, which would be the vacuum of what sucks in all these emotions and does something with them, and you sort of come out the other side, um, bouncing back on your feet again after the whole tumultuous cycle of going through all of these different emotions at one point or the other. But then again, someone once said during the Strand Gallery, you can almost look at it as a brain because it has different parts to the painting, and as similar to the brain, you have different aspects of the brain that sort of are responsible for different activities or emotions, if you will, uh, in that respect. So that was quite interesting.
And how long does your one sit takes?
Uh, it varies from painting to painting. However, with this one, I would lean circa about 6 hours, because then I built this up on layers, but I was also using a very new technique to painting was than I had been using prior, which is to create a smooth effect on the canvas, and also a drip effect to the paint to emphasize a sorrowful moment or the other. So there was quite a lot of water used on this canvas as opposed to other canvases where I would just paint with and not introduce anything to interrupt the paint. Um, so on that front, yeah, about 6 hours, and of course you've got the raised areas that I depict here, and this is almost kind of like the scarring of the soul or the heart, and that's what I wanted to interpret with that. But I also wanted to do that in a gentle way rather than in a very aggressive way, simply because that wasn't the scarring feeling I had at the time. It was not quite so dramatic scarring, if you will, or feeling of scarring. Uh, and hence the gentleness with it, and maybe the slight conspicuous aspect to it, rather than the obvious.
So I guess
Actually,
that if I
interesting. I was
go ahead, Josh.
Sorry, I was just going to comment. The raised areas that you referred to as scarring, immediately what they struck me as reminding me of was Japanese writing and the way that that is written often down the page rather than along. I'm, I don't know if that's at all an influence you had or if that's just completely coincidental and it's just something I happen to be seeing there.
Well, it's completely coincidental. It's certainly by no means the driving force to creating it. And it's interesting that you should say that, Josh, because only now that you've said it, and I take another look at it, there's this very interesting area here that sort of where my eye sort of goes to in reference to that. To Japanese writing. But that's interesting. No, it wasn't the driving force. But once again, it's always quite intriguing for me when a piece lends itself in such an ability that one is able to derive what they want from it, rather than what I'm terribly trying to drive them to. So, thank you.
And do you define the title before or after the painting?
After,
Okay. So if I come up,
yeah.
well, if there's a painting called Mixed Emotions, I will know that you didn't sit and finish it.
Yeah, you're quite right. And then, of course, to the left, if I may go there, you have seasons. Um, I think this one, once again, is fairly straightforward. Seasons, and I think this season that we're experiencing now is quite indicative of this piece, though this was actually painted middle part of this year. Um, I guess, if anything at all, from this painting, I see faces, quite a lot of it. Um, but I think for me, it was an emotional piece in the respect that, like seasons, we go through different emotions. But I suppose this is quite indicative of a hiatus for me, being at a very good point or place, if you will, um, emotionally, I suppose. And as such, that sort of spurred me on to getting paint on canvas. And but the other thing as well, which probably is not talked about quite a lot in quite a lot of the paintings, is that music plays a huge part in my creation of any piece. Uh, Never a painting have I done without listening to music. So quite a lot of that as well sort of is divisive in the outcome of the piece. Um, and you may find something that I may create having listened to Zeppelin or Hendrix or Fela Kuti. They tend to sort of have a different subject matter in the piece, and the use of the or brush strokes, or the use of the brush as well. So with this one, it would probably be maybe Nigel Kennedy, if that at all, listening to Four Seasons or something of that sort.
Can I just add that there's I omitted to add the pieces to the hangings in the cube, which is actually a real life guitar, which is called psychedelic guitar. Perhaps I should come back and add it.
Yes. Yes, yes. That's quite a fun piece actually. Um, uh,
Mm.
uh, uh, Leo and Josh. I'm not sure if Ed is with us, but one of the, for example, the piece I did on self-reflection. I had no gambit to paint behind the mirror to begin with. It simply happened so because I ran out of canvases, and that's the same thing with the piece that Kwame is referring to now, psychedelic guitar. I ran out of a canvas one evening after finishing one painting, and I still wanted to paint, and my guitar was the only thing I spotted with in that moment and time, and I reached out to it, and I started painting on it, and as a consequence to it, you have a finished piece of artwork, which now sits in a gallery space. But it's the same with self reflection. I had no preconceived notion to paint on the back of a mirror, but I just felt I need to paint on something, and I reached out to the mirror in the bedroom, and of course. My wife Nadia sort of looked at me with a very questionable look, and probably equally as well as very keen to pose the question, why are you painting on our mirror? But she's sort of come to expect that of me. Uh, it is also fair to point out credit cards and bank cards and her driving license has been used on a painting. I don't think Kwame has seen the painting, but it sits in our house. As a consequence to it, she's a very patient woman, bless her. She's had to apply for a new one, but also very kind to let me use have free reign as well. Sometimes I think maybe I sort of get too absorbed with what I'm doing, but there you are.
Wow, well done, Bruce. Very nice.
And of course the this piece. Oh, beg your pardon. This piece right here, and it'll be quite interesting to hear your take on this, Josh, after speaking about emotions. Japanese Garden, for me, uh, was pretty much indicative of what my experience of photographic images of Japan, Japanese gardens, what I've seen, the white,
Mhm.
the different colors that you find in the Japanese garden, but also in this case, the way um, the brush struck on the canvas. It almost kind of, for me, it's a striking of a brush on a canvas, almost kind of like a samurai sword, if you will, very concise, very expedient, and true to its form without waving. Um, and equally as well, with the white, and not just only the black. And this to me just felt very much so a piece that has all these very concise movements, but yet still a wonderful piece to look at. There's no. It's almost kind of like the description of what I would describe a Japanese battle is fought with honor. So therefore, the gruesome aspect of it, if you were to read about it, you'd certainly not find it. In fact, you'd almost read it and feel some sort of gentrifiedness about it, where albeit there's a slaying of a body, but you don't feel that gruesome aspect of murder, if that be the case, or taking of life. One dies with honor. So this piece is as wonderful as reading something of that in that context, or structuring something in that context of in that sense. So Japanese garden to me felt quite so apt with this with this painting. And once again, it was titled after I finished the painting rather than beforehand.
I think it's very interesting that you compared it to a battle, because for me, I find that the white line in the center, the circles, give very much a sense of chaos, and yet the picture as a whole is very serene and peaceful. So it's sort of almost sort of finding a peace through that chaos.
Yeah. That's a very interesting interpretation of it, of the piece. Chaos and serene in a chaotic environment. Um, I certainly haven't had uh, that sort of review from the exhibition, but I think it also lends itself with this piece quite so. As I was saying, a Japanese warrior taking life, but yet still, it doesn't feel as gruesome as maybe if someone talked about a life taken in the streets of Medellin or something of that sort, or the favelas. I'm sure the immediate thought process that comes with that is a gruesome scene. Whereas, um, whereas with this piece, for me, there's that whole battle, but it's not gruesome by any means. And that's how I look back in such a fantasistical manner with Japanese warriors and that sort of subject matter.
Yeah, really like this painting. It's very, yeah, the subtle black lines, and
Thank you.
that's the good thing about the abstract paintings, isn't it? I mean, you can really let your, I mean, you can think whatever you want to.
Absolutely. It's very possible for the viewer to interpret it the way it they want. And I think being part of being part of the experience, and I think it's very important for me as an artist to be objective rather than ex, be so regimented and defined and suggest that this is what I want you to see, and that's all. Um,
Yeah, but
yeah,
the colors, you know, very light colors in the end, background, it helps the serenity bit, you know, like peaceful,
yeah.
even though what Josh mentioned, the chaotic white lines, you know, it's like a hurricane or something. Cool.
It's quite also interesting, Josh, that you should speak of chaos because most
Mm.
people would hardly look at white, a color as white and chaotic in the same context, albeit when you look at, as Leo says, a tumultuous weathering system, you have aspects of white in there and gray, but it's very rare that one would in a context of a painting immediately go to the conclusion of chaos, but albeit that it can also be presentative of chaos as well. So that's very interesting that you should pick up on that.
Cool. Very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think this is pretty much all the paintings that we have from me on the cube. Now I don't know if Eddie and okay, I think Kwame's idle or just come on or
No,
and
no, no,
Josh.
I'm
Ah,
listening.
there we are.
Yeah.
Yes. So yes, there we are, gentlemen.
Oh, I
Well,
am
can
just
I just?
looking. Oh,
Sorry, Josh.
sorry, Kwame.
Go on, Josh.
I was just quickly going to say, I think there are the 3 paintings at View 13 that I don't think you've taken us through yet, if I'm correct.
Ah, yes, you're quite right. Oh, yes, we started with this painting, but we never talked about the other two, did we?
Yes, that's right.
Um,
Yes.
we started off with the one in the middle, Stellar Collision. That's a. It's fair to say the title was my niece's input. We I showed her this painting that I had finished uh, after creating it on Skype, and she lives in Dublin with my sister, and she pointed out that I get the sense of as if I was looking at a stellar collision, and it just seemed so apt because when you think about the stellar collision, the clusters of stars in the galaxy, it just seems so indicative of that. But once again, it's not very much a piece that sort of that's all you see and that's what it's going to be. It just keeps evolving and it gives you back more. And I don't know if you look at this area over here. However, I see the side of a face, almost that you would see in on money, but almost kind of a very male with a beard, a mustache, very much specific eyes, and there we have the forehead and the head. So when you look at that from that perspective, and this would be the left side of the face, I start to think about maybe going back to the Victorian period on how men used to groom themselves, and that's the sort of facial grooming I see there, a moustache and a very well groomed beard and that sort of stuff, and of course then you have this whole area over here. Uh, this I see not only just the collision of stars, but I also see, on the other hand, uh, different patterns of weathering, um, a whole cluster collection of weather sources. But stellar collision became a title that I felt relevant because outside of other things that I see, when I look through the piece and I walk myself through it, I've got some green going on at the top there. I've got close enough to some very deep red there, and I've also got some white here. And then, of course, you've got the obvious orange going on. And so, very indicative of outer space and what I possibly would think the effect of a collision in outer space of stars and everything else would this is what to me it would look like. So stellar collision seemed a sensible title and a wholesome contribution from my niece Kiva in Dublin. So that was the genesis of this piece. But the the interesting thing about this piece is, unlike there's two other pieces that are not in this exhibition. Unlike all the other pieces that you've seen in this exhibition, the approach with the brush and the contact with the canvas is very different to all the other pieces. This is another very different approach that I picked up in my painting style. So in the course of 2015, I have uh, picked up on two different forms that I'm finding very fascinating and exciting to express myself on canvas with. And one we talked about during as we're viewing emotions. Um, and seasons as well. And then, of course, now stellar collision. You'll notice that the as opposed to brush strokes, they're totally non-existent at all. There are no brush strokes with this painting, but it's a very different approach, which is using an upward approach to the canvas, and it makes contact with the canvas, and then the brush is lifted up again. So there are no up or down strokes at all with this piece. It's a simple contact with the canvas, a brush with paint on canvas. But it is quite time consuming because then you have to sort of find some control to say something with that approach to it. But yeah, there we are, stellar collision, as it were.
Yeah.
Hello?
Hi. Yeah.
I thought
Yeah,
I lost you all.
I
It
think
went
I
very
think we're
quiet,
all
everybody.
I think we're all deep in thought. I think that's that's what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I was using my
I
imaginations too.
Well, that's a good thing as well.
Yeah. Because I could
I
see
think I
someone
think
in
credit
here.
definitely has
You
to
know.
go to you.
Okay.
I'm
I
sorry,
think
Josh.
credit definitely. I'm just saying. I think credit definitely has to go to your niece because I certainly can see what she was seeing in terms of the sort of outer space imagery that's there. Although, funnily enough, I also see sort of something very archaic. It sort of reminds me of parchment or of things buried in the earth. So it's kind of those two sort of strangely almost contradictory things, sort of
Yeah,
space and exploration of the future, and yet also looking to the past and things that are very old.
yeah,
I
And
think we just have one last
yep,
painting to see, don't
it's
we?
it's the noir gold, isn't it?
yeah. With this piece, quite a lot of paint that I used, the gold and the aquatic green, which is pretty much where the gold sort of hasn't taken over. These are colors that keep evolving as depending on the amount of light that you have or little light that you have shining on the piece. Um, uh, Black Gold, Noir Gold, Black Gold is a piece that it seemed a very obvious title to it, one that's not too far-fetched from the piece itself. Quite a lot of, if you will, Rothko inspiration. Alas, though, the border is very defined, unlike most of Rothko's work. So there's some influence there. But I think with this piece, if anything at all, it talks like most of my subjects. Politics is never too far off. Um, the exploitation of oil and in some cases quite a lot that's never talked about, but the exploitation of gold minerals uh, is something coming from Zimbabwe. Quite a lot of gold. A lot of people were quite surprised to learn a huge number of institutes in countries that claim not to want anything to do with Zimbabwe. Well, from the gold perspective, a lot of those companies from certain countries that are very much happy to continue some sort of relationship or activity with Zimbabwe, albeit that they frown openly on their human rights or lack of from a political stance. So, for that perspective, the gold aspect of it has a lot to do with that. And then, of course, the noir would be the oil, and we look at the many taglines of the rhetoric with places like Nigeria, where albeit Nigeria is very rich in gold, but we also find that it seems some of that wealth from the oil seems to only go so far with the local or Nigerian people from a so-said specific area where the oil has been sourced from. So this piece is talking about those issues, but not so much with giving my opinion about what I think about what's happening in Nigeria, what's happening in Iraq, what's happening in Libya. But what I'm saying is, the black gold or the gold itself, is something, some thought has to be put towards that. Whatever one arrives at is entirely one's journey, rather than one that I want to totally plant in one's mind. But I'd certainly like to kickstart some discussion and see where that takes us.
Still there?
Yeah, we are.
Yes, I am.
That's
So I
why
suppose I
sometimes
saved the last two pieces.
Yeah,
Mm.
go ahead.
I suppose I saved the last two pieces that are incredibly thought provoking for the end.
Yeah.
Inadvertently.
Well, you know, I'm from Brazil, Bruce. I'm actually in Brazil right now,
Yeah.
and this past weekend we had an accident in one of the cities, and it's an old city for Brazil, which is not that old, but the city it actually it came to life when they found gold in there. So it's very explored as a city. Well, actually quite
Yeah.
exploited, and they had some accident with some mud, and a lot of people lost their places, and there's one mining company works there, and the government asked them to stop working while they're fixing stuff, and
Yeah.
85% of people from that region works for that company, and they all went on license because, well, this oil, gold, that's what's driven our growth, in Brazil at least. That's you go to a region, if it's in there, it's because at some point there was something profitable, and that's how they
Yeah.
became cities. And I went over there not too long ago, and there are several paintings with several painters who tried to express what gold meant to them when they got there, and people from all over, a lot of people from Africa, and I could see a lot when I was going through those last two paintings that you were. I know the one was stellar, had nothing to do, but the
Yeah.
colors were so gold, and they really reminded me of quite a few things I've seen in there. Very, very
Okay.
nice.
Yeah. Thank you. Many thanks.
It sounds like you touched people quite deeply, Bruce.
Yeah.
Um, I'm glad. I'm glad because if I can evoke some thought, albeit deep or not, and also something that strikes a chord and perhaps more so close to home. I'm quite glad that I've achieved that because then I have actually said something or started something worth listening to or looking at.
Oh,
So
definitely.
yeah, thank you so much.
Well, can I just add that the traffic in there is low. I think people are terrified of the idea of the gallery on the queue, but it's a glorious experience, and it's really amazing hearing Atu speak and then you speak. And I just whole idea is encouraging people to come in and have a look, and hopefully to listen to a recording of what's happened. But also to say that a small selection of the pieces from Atu and Bruce, I think we'll prepare them very, very limited edition for sale for those who are interested, if not interested in the original pieces. So just thought something that I can share with you. But I'm pleased to be part of this, and thanks to Eddie for proposing that we should do this. I hope that we're going to get more people into it and to enjoy what is in there.
Well, Josh and I had a brief discussion before
Mm.
everyone else joined us, and I was regaling him of my experience, and I just only started using the cube and for about 30 minutes prior to talking to him, and he took me around the cube and gave me some pointers. My knee jerk reaction was it was quite fun, a tool to use to view art, and I think I think as you pointed out, when people get over that initial precipice of this might be technically involving, they realize actually no, it's not. Um, then they'll certainly come on board. But I think the continuum of attracting traffic towards it is the one thing that will probably help people overcome that hurdle, um, if anything at all. But I don't know whether that is my undertaking simply because I've had dealings from an IT background, but I do feel that it's also uh, a positive tool, and people will find it also fun to navigate around.
Well, we're certainly very glad to hear that you enjoyed your experience on Cube, and I mean, I for one would like to say thank you very much for joining us today. It's been really fascinating, and it's really wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for
Yes.
the invitation, and thank you for allowing me to talk about my work on your platform.
Yeah, we're well. It was very good use of our time. I really enjoyed what I've seen, and really, we also recorded, while you were today. So you were going through your paintings and your work, and we've recorded. So I'm gonna edit just a rough copy, and I'll send it to Quam. Is that okay?
Thank you, Leo. Yes, that's splendid. Many thanks indeed.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't ask you beforehand if I could record it, so I did it. If you-
That's fine.
okay.
I think Eddie and Josh were having a conversation, and so I sort of expected it at some point.
Okay. Cool. Great. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. It's 5:30 for you.
Yes, yes, indeed. Well, thank you so much, Leo, for joining us.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Josh. Thank you, Quayne. And I guess I'll see you soon.
All the best.
Yes, see you on Cube, and yes, Bruce, if you ever want to return to Cube, please do let us know. If you have anyone you want to show around, please get in touch with me, and I'd be more than happy to set them up and help you with that.